Hi, Reverend Tony Suarez, and here are talking about Chapter 5 of my book about religious freedom, understanding religious freedom. What's law got to do with it? This is a synopsis of an introduction of all of the topics that we cover in the book, on the understanding that we're trying to give you a primer. It's not meant to be a law school, although I am a law school professor. I try not to confuse you going deep into the weeds of the law, but enough for you to understand, because I think it's important for all of us to understand the law and how decisions are made. Otherwise, we start getting into the concept that everything is fixed, everything is political, but there is a logic to the stuff, and I'm hopefully that after you've gone through the book, you've learned some things that I say to you, that you have a little bit more faith in how the system works, because ultimately democracy depends on faith. And in Chapter 5 of my book, we talk about offensive speech and hate speech. How much everyone knows I have the right to speech, free speech in the First Amendment. It's something you learn probably in third grade or so. But how far that goes is another question. Now, in the environment today, as we speak, we have real clashes over where the administration, the federal administration, is basically saying, if you say the wrong things, for example, an executive order that says if you speak negatively about Christian or Christianity or negatively about our government, that could be considered offensive speech for which you might get arrested. This is a challenge to this concept of free speech. So let's start off with what is free speech, a political speech. You basically can say anything you want, but there may be consequences. So if you call your next door neighbor a thief, you can do that, you're free to say it, but you know that he's going to sue you, right? So we're not prohibited from saying he's a thief, but you have to pay the consequences of doing so. Now, there are other types of speech that can be dangerous. So the most famous one, in one of our Supreme Court history, says you cannot yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Why would the government be able to limit that kind of speech? Because if you yell fire and people start running out, that cause injury, and therefore that kind of speech can be limited, and you can be either charged with a crime or you can be sued if in fact your speech caused harm to other people, and as a result of a statement you made that was not necessarily false, just it could have been true, but if you did it irrationally in a manner, then that would cause you a problem, and the government would have the right to interfere with your right to say whatever you want. So I use in the book, I use an example which I like, because it was an actual case, came out of New York, of a Hindu couple who was celebrating the Festival of Lights in Queens. Those of you who live in Queens, you know the Queens, New York is a very diverse community, diversity. There are literally communities from all over the world in the Queens. And in that particular case, there was a Hindu couple who was celebrating a celebration of Diwali. And the Diwali has symbols that they use for their Christmas holiday season. One of the symbols is a cross, an inverted cross. And that cross looks very much like the Nazi cross. It is not the cross, actually worked the other way around in verse, but it's difficult if you're not sophisticated enough. You would look at it as if it was a Nazi party cross from the Nazi party of Germany. Well, in that particular case, the Hindu couple was displaying their cross, the Diwali cross, and the Jewish community that lives in Queens was very upset by the display of this cross, and felt that this was agitating and it was causing was a hate speech, and so they called the police in order to try to stop the Hindu couple from displaying the Diwali cross. And so at this point, the police come over. The question I pose for you is, does the police have the right to tell the Hindu couple take down the cross because it's offending other people, and it is basically some sort of hate speech which can agitate? You have to look at that from the point of view of the people who make the speech and the people who are receiving the speech. And so the courts, when they go to that determination of whose rights are being violated, they have to weigh the rights of the person making the speech and weighing the rights of whether or not the person is actually offended or can be offended. So just like the speech about a fire in this crowded movie theater can be restricted, can we restrict fighting words or hating words? If we allow the government to restrict them, and because it might cause a danger, at what point does that require some sort of interpretation by the police officer at the street to make that kind of determination? That is a very complex balancing act between whether or not the state has a role in stopping freedom of speech, if in fact it is hate speech or can cause harm to someone else by being hateful and offensive speech. Again, this is a complex issue. I cannot explain it all here in the short video, but in the case book, I call it a case book as if it was a law book. It's meant for non-lawyers. Okay, I talk about cases, I discuss it, but it is not a case book. It's about cases. And so in the book, I go into discussion about what is the test? What is the balancing test the court has to go through in order to determine, can we prohibit that type of speech? This is an important topic for you to understand, because as we speak, we're in a position where people in politics are very hostile toward each other. And just what you say can cause someone else to have a reaction that could cause violence. And then the question is, the person who's trying to agitate by using words, how far can they go? How far can they go before they violate somebody else's rights? And then the government has a right to step in and have you arrested for what you say. So in chapter 5, we talk about hate speech, we talk about prohibited speech, we talk about different kinds of traditions that are from different countries, and in particularly all the nations and cultures that we have in the United States. I'm hoping by reading this chapter you'll better understand the limitations that you have on speech and where your free speech can invade someone else's privacy. Thanks.
Cut. That was 8.